First tonight, Nottinghamshire's police commissioner has accused far-right groups of hijacking the tragic killings of 3 young girls in Southport to stoke violence. 15 people were arrested as officers separated rival protests in Nottingham's Old Market Square. There were demonstrations in Leicester and Derby too, but officers prevented the more serious violence seen in other towns and cities. Our social affairs correspondent Jeremy Ball reports.
Ugly scenes in the centre of Nottingham as hundreds joined Saturday's rival protests. There were bottles thrown and offensive Islamophobic chanting as anger boiled over. It was billed on social media as a peaceful vigil in solidarity with Southport, a tragedy that prompted false claims that the suspected killer was a Muslim asylum seeker. Anti-racism groups believe that was a cynical ploy to stoke tensions. Part of a pattern, this vigil was promoted in a post that didn't have any contact details and used a slogan from other violent protests: "Enough is enough."
It was touted as a vigil to reflect on the deaths of Alice, Bibi and Elsie. It's clearly been hijacked by a right-wing group that feel that violence and vitriol is the way to express their frustrations.
It's a complex dynamic. Legitimate protesters on both sides feel they're defending their British values. But the right to protest doesn't give people a right to violence, incitement or threats. And the police made 15 arrests as they kept these two groups apart. Rival groups faced off in Leicester too, where 2 people were arrested and police imposed a dispersal order controlling movement in the city centre and areas with the largest Asian communities. The city mayor says there was a familiar pattern.
I remember a couple of years ago we had some disturbances on the streets of Leicester, and it was very clear that was fueled by lies that were put out on social media. And exactly the same thing is happening here, this time on a much wider scale, in other towns and cities. There's certainly very big questions for the social media companies.
Whose streets are they?
By Sunday, concerns moved to Derby as anti-racism campaigners gathered to oppose a possible far-right protest that didn't materialise. But Sue's still so afraid of reprisals that she didn't want to give her surname. She blames divisive rhetoric.
As long as we have a society where a lot of people feel disenfranchised, feel that they are under threat, feel that, how are they going to feed their kids, then it gives scope for the far right to find scapegoats. When they use, invasion, all this kind of stuff, then it's very easy for people to accept those scapegoats.
The East Midlands escaped the worst of this violence, but it's left many people feeling fearful simply because of the colour of their skin.
Well, Jeremy's here now. Jeremy, how similar are these scenes to what's happened here in the past?
Well, I think it is very reminiscent of what a lot of people will have seen over a decade ago in both Leicester and Nottingham, when there was much more serious violence, actually, between rival groups at several English Defence League rallies. The big difference now, I think, is the way that social media is working. It's rallying protesters so much more rapidly, so much more effectively. You'll often see a post, that's encouraging people to share legitimate concerns about, things like immigration, but it'll be mixed and with rumours and disinformation. You don't always know who's behind those posts. You don't always know if there's a hidden agenda. Some of them are being amplified by accounts overseas, and that makes this really, really difficult to control.
It certainly does. Well, stay with us, Jeremy, because while there were ugly scenes on King Street on Saturday, the rest of Nottingham city centre remained largely unaffected by the protests. Giles Taylor has been back there today to see how businesses coped this weekend.
On Saturday, this street was the scene of an angry confrontation between 2 sets of protesters. But for many of the surrounding shops, business was able to continue as usual.
We were a bit worried because we heard the news in the morning that it's going to be happening. It was quite peaceful at first, so we were fine. Then later, when people started gathering and people started a bit escalating at some point, we were a bit worried, but police was around, so we were fine. They were coming and asking people and employees when they were leaving as well. They come up to them and ask them if they are happy to leave by themselves or if they should escort them a bit further from the scene.
Well, we understand that a number of them who were close to the market square will have been impacted by the protests, but on a whole, we believe that it's been business as usual.
In the run-up to the protests, Nottingham Business Improvement District provided advice and support to hundreds of businesses in the city centre.
We'd like to give huge thanks to Nottinghamshire Police. I believe the presence in the city centre on that day helped really to manage the protests and ensure that most people who came into the city didn't have any trouble and didn't see the impact of what was taking place. I think, like most of us, we didn't know what we were going to see here in the city, and I think the police presence certainly really helped us here in Nottingham. But I think Nottingham as well, we know we don't stand for this kind of thing, and actually we stood together. The community vibe was very strong. I think most people came in and had a great time and enjoyed the city for what it is, which is a great place to visit.
But while the threat of more protests remains, the authorities are staying vigilant. And today the City Council has been keen to reassure people from minority communities that Nottingham remains safe.
What we're doing as an authority and in partnership with the police is keeping in touch with the local communities, building their confidence, hearing what their fears are and responding to those. We can't be complacent whatsoever now the weekend's over, so we're still looking and working with the community to see how we can continue to keep them safe.
Giles Taylor, BBC East Midlands Today, Nottingham.
So, Jeremy, the trouble was well contained, but it could have been so much worse, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, here we didn't see that, appalling criminality that caused so much trouble in some other parts of the country. Random attacks on mosques, attacks on hotels thought to house asylum seekers. You can only imagine how terrifying that must have been for any of the people inside those hotels. And, that was the tip of the iceberg, really, the fear it's causing, because this weekend there were British citizens born and bred here saying they were worried to leave their own homes in case they were targeted because they're Muslim or because they're Asian. Now, there is an obvious risk, of course, that those incidents could therefore provoke some kind of violent response, and that's partly why the government has now announced extra money to protect those mosques.
Well, our reporter Monica Plaha has today visited the Leicester Islamic Centre to see what the feeling is there.
Muslims attending Zuhur prayers at Leicester Central Mosque. After the wave of violent demonstrations across the country, worshippers remain defiant. It's an opportunity for Imam Dr. Hussein to reassure them about the importance of unity and peace during this worrying time.
There is so much benefit in love. There's absolutely no benefit in hate. In the absence of security, like we saw on the weekend, it creates rife. It creates a sense of doubt where a person feels scared even to leave their own homes.
And there are many Muslims and ethnic minority communities who feel very worried and scared right now. What are you telling them? How are you reassuring them?
Latest events, I'm afraid to say, a lot of our community are talking about the inevitability of it, that this was always coming. So we really need to change the mood of the country, I think. We need communities to show the benefit of coming together, to show the benefit of how communities can sit, eat, pray and play together.
The Home Office says that mosques are being offered greater protection with new emergency security. Do you feel reassured by this? Is this enough?
So I am sure that our community will be reassured by this announcement, and I hope that we can ensure that this peace and security prevails everywhere, not just in the places of worship.
What happens now and what are you calling for next?
Is keep smiling, keep serving your community, keep your shoulders straight. Don't ever in any way drop your shoulders and feel embarrassed to be a Muslim. We don't in any way want people to drop their shoulders. We are always agents of positivity, even in the worst possible times. And certainly our message at this difficult and sensitive time is the same, that we keep smiling, we keep serving, and we stay positive as much as possible.
Wise words from Dr. Atha Hussein. And Jeremy, other faith leaders are rallying round too, aren't they?
Yeah, the Bishop of Leicester has shared one appeal for unity, which has come from Christian and Muslim and Jewish leaders in Liverpool. I've also heard this afternoon from HIMA, which supports deprived communities in Nottingham. Interesting this, they're calling for dialogue about what's causing the violence and also offering to work with anyone who has sincere concerns to tackle the underlying causes.
Do we know about anything about those people that have been arrested at the weekend?
Yeah, an update this evening from Leicestershire Police, who've named 2 people in their 30s charged after Saturday's protests. Charisse Gregory of Beaumont Leys is accused of racial and religious harassment and assaulting an emergency worker. Kieran Fawcett from Bushby, he's been charged with malicious communications over calls to the fire service. Nothing so far, though, from the Nottinghamshire force.
And the Prime Minister's also been responding this afternoon, hasn't he?
Yep, Keir Starmer has set out more action to try to stop this violence, what he's calling a standing army of specialist police officers, as well as swift sanctions for anyone involved in riots. And you might remember a similar crackdown after those 2011 riots, Emily, when several teenagers in Nottingham got hefty jail sentences, sometimes simply for being part of a group where other people committed violent disorder. So the government hoping there will be some real deterrence here.
Jeremy, thanks very much.